Chapter 3535, Chapter 609, Shocking All Sides. Chapter 3535, Chapter 609, Shocking All Sides. Chapter 609, Shocking All Sides. Following the sound of a bell, the city battle involving 16 third-tier cities officially ended. However, out of the 16 cities, only Star Lake City was filled with lively voices. As for the other 15 cities, they fell into a dead silence, unable to accept the outcome of the city battle. 3 consecutive defeats. It was originally supposed to be a one-sided domination of Star Lake City by the 15 mobile cities. Yet, what ended up happening was the domination of the 15 cities instead. Like the Tier 5 match, Zero Wing had single-handedly annihilated the 15 cities' forces in the Tier 4 match. The outcome had dumbfounded everyone spectating the match, and it was especially so for Star Lake City's various powers. Crap. What's the deal with Zero Wing? I can accept the Tier 5 match's results since the participants were Zero Wing's executives, but how did Zero Wing's newcomers become such monsters as well? Since when did Clay Blade and Pace Angel become so amazing? Didn't they arrive at Star Lake City in the same period I did? Incredible. All 20 members of Zero Wing's Tier 4 battle group have strength rivaling Tier 5 players. That Clay Blade and Pace Angel even have legendary standard basic attribute. Whether it was Shafong or Red Frost, they had long been famous in Star Lake City. So, even though the two exhibited astonishing strength in the Tier 5 and Tier 6 matches, the shock everyone experienced from seeing the two's performance was a little more subdued compared to the shock they experienced from watching the Tier 4 match that just concluded. It was especially so when everyone saw Clay Blade and Pace Angel's performance. Due to Clay Blade and Pace Angel's affiliation with Zero Wing, every power operating in Star Lake City had long possessed their detailed information. Meanwhile, everyone's evaluation of the two was that they were both at the standard of ordinary participants. Under normal circumstances, it would take them many years to meet the requirements to join an ace battle group in Star Lake City. There was even a possibility they might never qualify until they retired. Yet, contrary to everyone's expectations, Clay Blade and Pace Angel displayed strength that even the various powers of Star Lake City had to fear during the city battle. Meanwhile, the only explanation everyone could come up with was that Zero Wing had something to do with Clay Blade and Pace Angel's astonishing growth, and anyone who said otherwise would be lying or delusional. For a time, many newcomers who had recently joined Star Lake City's various powers began to yearn for Zero Wing. Many also regretted their decision not to join Zero Wing. Otherwise, they might have obtained strength rivaling, or even surpassing, Clay Blade and Pace Angel. Myriad Forest City's VIP viewing room. What should we do now, City Lord? Myriad Sky asked, her complexion a little pale as she looked toward Myriad Forest City's City Lord, sitting beside her. Star Lake City is bound to become a second-tier city after this. Originally, they thought that, after their defeat in the Tier 5 and Tier 6 matches, they could rely on the Tier 4 match to temporarily hinder Star Lake City's promotion to a second-tier city. However, they did not expect such a devastating outcome. 3 consecutive victories. After obtaining such a result against the 15 cities, Star Lake City would undoubtedly become a second-tier city. At that time, many upper-ranking hegemonic powers would seek to establish themselves in Star Lake City. So long as Star Lake City gave the word, these upper-ranking hegemonic powers seeking to join Star Lake City would be more than willing to bring Myriad Forest City to the brink of ruin. There's nothing we can do, Myriad Forest City's City Lord said, sighing. Then, he whispered, get in touch with Zero Wing. So long as Zero Wing is willing to spare us, we will compensate with 20 drops of Stardew and 4,000 life potions. Isn't that a little too much? Myriad Sky quietly asked. A sum of 4,000 bottles was already equivalent to half a year's consumption for the Myriad Forest Legion. Moreover, although life potions had a price tag of 50,000 star coins per bottle, acquiring them in bulk wasn't easy. Even Myriad Forest City would have difficulty taking out so many bottles on such short notice. As for Stardew, it was even more precious a resource. 20 drops of Stardew were already equivalent to 1/3 of Myriad Forest City's current stockpile. If they were to give away 20 drops, it would take many years for Myriad Forest City to recover the loss. Even if that's the case, we still have to give it. We cannot afford to provoke Zero Wing. Haven't you seen that even Skystar City's ace battle group was defeated? In a sense, Zero Wing is even more terrifying than Silver Frost City, Myriad Forest City's City Lord said, shaking his head. Zero Wing has only recently started to develop, so it is probably lacking in cultivation resources. If we drag our feet until Zero Wing has fully grown, even if we offer to double the compensation at that time, Zero Wing might not bother to accept it. I'll take care of it, then, Myriad Sky said, no longer hesitating. No third-tier city could withstand the wrath of a second-tier city, much less Zero Wing, an existence capable of going up against a first-tier city's ace battle group. Myriad Forest City wasn't the only city to secretly contact Zero Wing. At the same time, the city lords of the other third-tier cities had similarly sent people to get in touch with Zero Wing, hoping to gain Zero Wing's forgiveness. While all this was happening, seated at the central position of the VIP viewing room, Xiao Quan wore an ashen look on his face. He had naturally noticed the actions of the city lords around him. Unfortunately, there was nothing he could do about it. Others might not know the extent of Shifeng's strength after seeing his attack during the Tier 5 match, but as an outer member of Demon's Gate, Xiao Quan understood it very well. Simply put, it was over. There was nothing more he could hope to accomplish against Zero Wing. Not to mention, Zero Wing's foundation far exceeded his expectations. Not only did Zero Wing's Tier 5 members perform astonishingly, but even the guild's relatively unknown Tier 4 members had shown themselves capable of transcending tiers. At this point in time, Zero Wing simply wasn't an existence he could afford to provoke. No wonder Xia Qingying supported him so strongly back then. When Xiao Quan rewatched Shifeng's battle footage, a hint of regret and anger filled his eyes. It had always been his principle to befriend the strong. Had he known that Shifeng possessed such strength earlier on, he would have chosen to discreetly resolve the issue with Silk Radish instead. But while I might have offended him after this, with the current strength of Zero Wing and Star Lake City, they still aren't a threat to my position in Silver Frost City. At worst, I'll just avoid having any dealings with them in the future. He honestly hadn't expected things to turn out this way when he belittled Shifeng back during the Green God Corporation's recruitment event. However, as the son of Silver Frost City's City Lord and an outer member of Demon's Gate, Xiao Quan did not have to fear Zero Wing and Star Lake City, either. There were significant differences between second-tier and third-tier city battles. Firstly, the scale was different. Instead of just 200 participants per tier, cities would have to field 1,000 participants per tier. Secondly, the Tier 6 match was weighted even more heavily, making up 60% of the final score. In comparison, the Tier 6 match of third-tier city battles didn't make up even 50% of the final score. Lastly, due to the low number of second-tier cities on the Starlight continent, second-tier cities were only allowed to engage in a city battle with the same opponent once every 5 years. Because of these 3 points, very few second-tier cities would ever face the threat of demotion. What was more likely to happen was a change in rulership or a complete overhaul of City Legion members. Shortly after, Xiao Quan boarded a supersonic aircraft and returned to Silver Frost City less than half an hour after the city battle ended. Then, treating the city battle as nothing more than a trivial matter, he immersed himself in training, completely ignoring the matter of Star Lake City and Zero Wing. Meanwhile, an hour after Xiao Quan left, the 15 cities began transferring their power furnaces to Star Lake City one after another. At the same time, the Zero Wing Training Center became overcrowded with representatives and young geniuses who were either here to congratulate Zero Wing or join Zero Wing. All of a sudden, the training center had become the focal point of Star Lake City. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know. Report chapter so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 35-38, Chapter 6-12, Help with Training. Chapter 35-38, Chapter 6-12, Help with Training. Chapter 6-12, Help with Training. Zero Wing Training Center, top floor, Guild Leader's Office. Under Gentle Snow's lead, Mu Huangwu, Xia Qingying, and 17 youths entered Shifeng's office, instantly making the spacious room a little crowded. Of the 17 youths following Mu Huangwu and Xia Qingying, 4 wore suits, looking like bodyguards, while the remaining 13 wore black sportswear. The youths in sportswear wore the starry scythe emblem, a symbol denoting their official membership with the Night Watch City's Night Watch Legion. The 17 young men and women stood in 2 rows and wore stern expressions, the uniformity of their actions making them look like trained soldiers. The weakest among them was a 2-star Grandmaster, while 2 were even 2-star limit Grandmasters. Even when these youths were just standing there, Hidden Soul and Gentle Snow couldn't help but feel a strong pressure coming from them. Incredible. Sure enough, the Green God Corporation is vastly superior to the average corporation, Shifeng inwardly exclaimed after looking at the 13 youths behind Mu Huangwu and Xia Qingying. Typically, the young talents nurtured by powers operating in second-tier cities could, at best, become 1-star Grandmasters before the age of 30. This wasn't simply due to a lack of talent. It was also due to a lack of resources. Yet, of the 17 youths Mu Huangwu and Xia Qingying had brought with them, all of them were under 25. And among the 13 new faces, one of them, a young man with a short stature and a pretty face, even looked like he was no older than 16 or 17. When Shifeng saw the young man, he quickly recognized the other party. The young man was none other than the White Emperor, Azure Shadow. In Shifeng's previous life, Azure Shadow was one of the pseudo-great grandmasters nurtured by Mu Huangwu. At the same time, he was the youngest taboo under the Green God Corporation's command. Despite not owning a divine artifact, Azure Shadow could exhibit the power of taboos. During his peak, he even ranked among the 10 great rangers of the Greater God's domain. At the time, even without divine artifacts, he could still rival ancient gods. According to rumors, if the White Emperor could get his hands on a divine artifact, he could even compete for the top 3 spots among the 10 great rangers. However, following Mu Huangwu's retirement, Azure Shadow also vanished without a trace, his disappearance becoming a mystery in the Green God Corporation. After taking a seat, Mu Huangwu got straight to the point and asked, "May I know if our previous discussion of partnership is still valid, Guild Leader Shi? Are you talking about Zero Wing helping the Green God Corporation's members enter the Night Watch Legion's ace battle groups?" Shifeng asked, recalling Xia Qingying's previous business proposal after hearing Mu Huangwu's question. "That's right." Mu Huangwu nodded excitedly. Then, he pointed at the 17 youths behind him and said, "So long as Zero Wing can help the Green God Corporation nurture them and help them join an ace battle group in the Night Watch Legion, I can promise Zero Wing 70% of their city contribution on behalf of the Green God Corporation." "You want Zero Wing to train them?" Shifeng couldn't help but be a little stunned as he turned to look at the equally stunned youths. "Are you sure you're not joking with me, Elder Mu?" The 17 youths behind Mu Huangwu were the Green God Corporation's core paragons. Moreover, each of them was a bona fide Tier 6 expert in God's domain. They were already regarded as executives in the Green God Corporation, and they were existences standing at the apex of God's domain. Yet, Mu Huangwu was offering to let Zero Wing borrow their strength. Even if it was under the condition of training, it was still a ludicrous offer. Honestly, if it wasn't for Mu Huangwu's unique status, Shifeng would have instantly written off Mu Huangwu's words as nonsense. After all, even in the various upper-ranking hegemonic powers, only guild leaders and vice-guild leaders would have the authority to mobilize such a force. If Xia Qingying, a senior vice president of the Green God Corporation, were to try the same, the 17 youths wouldn't have heeded her orders at all, much less go under the wing of another power. "I'm not joking," Mu Huangwu stated definitively. "I have brought them all up from when they were still children. If any of them dare disobey your arrangements, just tell me, and I'll teach them a lesson." Hearing Mu Huangwu's words, the 17 youths shuddered and quickly retracted whatever words they originally intended to say. Meanwhile, Xia Qingying couldn't help but look at Mu Huangwu in disbelief. Originally, she thought Mu Huangwu had only come to agree to Shifeng's conditions and have Shifeng assist these 17 youths in getting into the Night Watch Legion's ace battle groups. She never imagined Mu Huangwu would leave the training of these youths to Shifeng. It should be known that these youths were paragons that the Green God Corporation had nurtured with the intention of sending them into conglomerates or pseudo-apex powers. They were meant to pave a smoother path for the Green God Corporation in the future. It was why the Green God Corporation had invested so heavily in developing these youths. Even if these youths failed to become core executives in the corporations or pseudo-apex powers they had joined, they would still become existences wielding a certain degree of authority. Yet, Mu Huangwu was offering to let Zero Wing, or more specifically, Shifeng, instruct these youths. So long as this deal went through, these youths would effectively owe Shifeng a favor. In that case, should Shifeng encounter any trouble and require assistance in the future, he could call upon these youths, and they would be obligated to help him, lest they wish to be known as ungrateful. If you truly wish for Zero Wing to train them, we can do that for you, Elder Mu, Shifeng answered. Then, he calmly looked toward the 2 rows of youths and continued, but Zero Wing has a condition. Following Shifeng's words, the 17 youths present couldn't help but cast a contemptuous look toward him. They would only be training under Zero Wing for several days. There was no way they could achieve any improvements in such a short time. This was simply a way for Mu Huangwu to sell Shifeng a favor. Under such circumstances, Shifeng should already be thanking his lucky stars if they were even willing to listen to his commands. Yet, despite being offered such a generous deal, Shifeng still dared to ask for more. Feel free to state your condition, guild leader Shi. Mu Huangwu did not get angry at Shifeng's words. On the contrary, he smiled and said, not to mention one condition, even 10 conditions wouldn't be a problem. Elder Mu. Azure Shadow couldn't help but look toward Mu Huangwu anxiously. After all was said and done, the 17 of them were all Tier 6 players. Moreover, they were either pseudo-5th floor experts or experts who had mastered saint-ranked mana techniques. Even alone, each of them could put up a good fight against 5th floor experts. Not to mention, they were all equipped with legendary weapons. In terms of combat power, they already stood at the apex of God's domain. Moreover, as individuals who had become 2-star grandmasters at such a young age, they had a limitless future ahead of them. Yet, Mu Huangwu was now making it seem as if they were the lucky ones for being able to train under Zero Wing. However, Mu Huangwu did not offer any explanations and simply sent a sharp glare at Azure Shadow, causing the youth to keep quiet. You jest, Elder Mu. Nonchalantly, Shifeng said, I only need them to sign a God's Domain contract promising lifetime confidentiality and pay a training fee of 10 God crystals per person. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know. Report chapter so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 35-39, Chapter 6-13, Actual Tier 6 Players. Chapter 35-39, Chapter 6-13, Actual Tier 6 Players. Chapter 6-13, Actual Tier 6 Players. 10 God Crystals? That's daylight robbery. Upon hearing Shifeng's conditions, Azure Shadow could no longer hold himself back. Every power had its own systems when it came to developing geniuses, so it was normal for Shifeng to wish to keep Zero Wing's training system a secret. So long as the conditions in the God's Domain contract weren't excessive, they would have no problem signing it. But it was a different story for the training fee of 10 God Crystals. God Crystals might not be as rare as fragmented legendary weapons, but they were still considered a strategic resource by the greater God's Domain's various powers. They could be used to restore certain fragmented legendary items into legendary items. Hence, most powers would keep a tight hold over their God Crystals. At present, the market value of a God Crystal was only slightly lower than that of a piece of fragmented legendary equipment. And as 10 God Crystals were enough to repair most fragmented legendary items, a sum of 10 God Crystals was essentially equivalent to one piece of legendary equipment. In other words, Shifeng was asking to be paid 17 pieces of legendary equipment for training them for only several days. Not even Apex powers would dare make such an egregious demand. Even Xia Qingying, who favored Shifeng training the Green God Corporation's talents, couldn't help but doubt her ears when she heard Shifeng's price. At this point, Shifeng might as well ask if he could clean out the Green God Corporation's coffers. Zero Wing won't insist on the matter, Shifeng said, chuckling. We can simply follow our previous agreement. In return for helping your members join the Night Watch Legion's ace battle groups, Zero Wing will receive 70% of their city contributions. As for our bet, Elder Mu, you will need to help with training Zero Wing's members from time to time. Following Shifeng's words, the 17 youths standing behind Mu Huangwu instantly exploded into an uproar. Elder Mu, it's already enough for us to have your training. Even without Zero Wing's help, we can still become aces in the Night Watch Legion. I agree. With our strength and talent, even if we fail to become aces this year, we can definitely make it next year. We'll only miss out on, at most, 1 or 2 city battles. The loss of points won't affect the corporation's plans in the long run. The 17 youths spoke up one after another. Although none of them outright mentioned Zero Wing as being the crux of the problem, they clearly indicated that the transaction with Zero Wing wasn't worthwhile and Shifeng was merely taking them for fools. Okay. We'll go with your arrangement, Guild Leader Shi. I'll pay 10 God Crystals for each of them, Mu Huangwu said after some hesitation. Once their training concludes, I will hand you all 170 God Crystals. Can we sign the contract now? Elder Mu, that's 170 God Crystals we are talking about, Xia Qingying worriedly said. She couldn't help but be astonished by Mu Huangwu's decision. A sum of 170 God Crystals was by no means insignificant. Previously, even after Shifeng was willing to part with an astronomical amount of wealth, she had only managed to collect 200 God Crystals from the Eternal Chamber of Commerce. Although Mu Huangwu had plenty of resources on hand due to him being one of the Green God Corporation's 3-star Grandmasters, it still wouldn't be easy for him to take out 170 God Crystals. He might even have to make some sacrifices with regard to the Green God Corporation's branch in Nightwatch City. No matter how Xia Qingying thought about it, she simply couldn't understand why Mu Huangwu was willing to go to such lengths. Don't worry, Vice President Xia. I've been saving for many years, so I can still afford to take out 170 God Crystals, Mu Huangwu explained, understanding Xia Qingying's concerns. Since I suggested this partnership, I will shoulder the full payment. If you are willing to go that far, I won't be against it, Xia Qingying said, waving her hand and indirectly expressing that she would keep this matter a secret from the corporation's other executives. Subsequently, Mu Huangwu took the initiative to hash out a God's Domain contract via his quantum watch. The contract mainly detailed the transaction between him and Zero Wing. As for the confidentiality contract meant for Azure Shadow and the others, Shifeng would have to prepare it himself. Meanwhile, after seeing all that Mu Huangwu had done, Shifeng naturally wouldn't dissuade or object to the other party's decision. On the contrary, he welcomed it very much. Shifeng urgently needed God Crystals and 7 Luminaries Crystals, so much so that he even intended to trade some of Star Lake City's contribution points for God Crystals and 7 Luminaries Crystals. Otherwise, there was little he could do with his existing stockpiles. Here is the confidentiality contract, have a look at it. You can sign it if you find no problems with it, Shifeng said as he sent each of the 17 youths a lifetime confidentiality contract. The contract's terms were simple. Azure Shadow and the others were simply required to keep all details regarding their training a secret. Should they leak information without Shifeng's consent, they would be permanently banished from God's domain. After Azure Shadow and the others finished reading, they briefly looked at the contract Mu Huangwu signed before placing their signature on their respective confidentiality contracts. Excellent. Since we have established our partnership, training will commence tonight, Shifeng said after seeing all 17 youths sign the confidentiality contract. Then, he sent them the coordinates of the miniature ancient world's world passage and continued, log into God's domain tonight and head to these coordinates. We will meet up there and begin your training. Although he wasn't particularly keen on letting these 17 youths in on Zero Wing's secrets, it would be a waste not to make use of their strength. After all, these were 17 Tier 6 players equipped with legendary weapons they were talking about. They were existences that even conglomerates and upper-ranking hegemonic powers would try to avoid provoking. Got it. We'll be there on time, Azure Shadow and the others responded after memorizing the coordinates. However, despite none of them saying it, all of them had already inwardly decided they would make trouble for Zero Wing's Tier 5 guild leader later on. Meanwhile, after the partnership was established, Mu Huangwu's group returned to their accommodations in Star Lake City. On their way back, Mu Huangwu urged Azure Shadow and the others to quickly head toward the meeting point, his urging exasperating the 17 youths. Meanwhile, back in Shifeng's office. Do you really plan on bringing them with us, guild leader? Hidden Soul couldn't help but ask as she watched Shifeng organizing some documents. The Western continent remains a secret even in the Eternal Realm right now. Of course. Shifeng nodded and smiled. This is a rare opportunity. Since I've already agreed to train them, I naturally have to do my best. Moreover, not only am I going to take them to the Western continent, but I'm also going to let them learn the mana purification technique. I intend to thoroughly change the power structure of existing second-tier city legions and let that young Master Xiao know the price of provoking Zero Wing. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know. Report chapter so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 3540, Chapter 614, Instructor Black Flame? Chapter 3540, Chapter 614, Instructor Black Flame? Chapter 614, Instructor Black Flame? Silver Frost City, City Lord's Mansion. Inside an isolated room the size of a football field, numerous youths clad in standardized sportswear were nimbly evading air bullets coming from their surroundings while rapidly ascending a majestic staircase made of singularity. The metal staircase consisted of 300 steps. With each step these youths ascended, the grimmer their expressions would become. Some youths would also become incapable of moving their feet after reaching the 100th step and beyond, and so long as any youth stopped moving, they would quickly be sent flying off the staircase by multiple air bullets. Then, they would quickly get back on their feet and resume climbing the staircase again. Although most of these youths were under the age of 25, each and every one of them was a 2-star Grandmaster. Several youths had even developed their mental strength to the 2-star limit Grandmaster standard already. However, compared to the youths continuously struggling to climb the staircase, the man with graying hair standing on the 298th step was a stark contrast. Even when struck by air bullets repeatedly, the man stood firm in his position. When the air bullets struck the gray-haired man, they were like rocks hitting the bottom of the ocean. Their impact created neither any sound nor any ripples. It was as if these air bullets didn't actually exist. The City Lord is incredible. I have to use all my strength just to withstand a hit from those air bullets, yet the City Lord can neutralize the air bullet's impact simply by manipulating his muscle. Is this the strength of 3-star Grandmasters? The City Lord is probably at the cusp of becoming a great Grandmaster already. If he can take the final step, Silver Frost City will welcome a new era of prosperity. When the youths resting below the staircase looked at the man standing on the 298th step, passion and reverence burned in their eyes. The man was Xiao Yihu, Silver Frost City's legendary City Lord and the role model of countless geniuses and paragons. Not only was Xiao Yihu a pseudo-great Grandmaster, but he was also a member of the Galaxy Conglomerate's esteemed Council of Elders. Over the centuries, he had nurtured numerous outstanding disciples, some of whom had become the core executives of upper-ranking hegemonic powers. A few of his disciples were even part of the Galaxy Conglomerate's Council of Elders currently. While the resting youths were trying to figure out how they could receive Xiao Yihu's guidance, Xiao Yihu's resting eyes suddenly snapped open. Then, in only a dozen steps, he arrived at the bottom of the staircase and looked at the young man who had just entered the room. The young man had a fit body and a cold expression. The instant he appeared, all the resting youths in the room kept quiet and looked at the young man respectfully. Did something happen on Little Quan's side, Zhencheng? Xiao Yihu asked in a low voice as he looked at the young man approaching him. Nothing happened to Xiao Quan during his outing, City Lord, the young man named Jiangcheng reported. But something did happen over at Star Lake City. Did the 15 cities lose? Xiao Yihu asked. Then, in a slightly angry tone, he continued, "What a bunch of useless imbeciles. Can't they even complete such a simple task?" Not only did the 15 cities lose, but Star Lake City has also been promoted into a second-tier city, Zhencheng said, nodding. Then, he handed Xiao Yihu a report and continued, "Here are the details of the city battle. Zero Wing is much stronger than anticipated, and even Skystar City's ace battle group has suffered defeat at Zero Wing's hands. Zero Wing is indeed strong. Old Feng has also finally gotten his lifelong wish. It's a pity that he is unaware of how deep the waters of second-tier cities are," Xiao Yihu nonchalantly commented after reading the report. Regardless, Tell little Quan to focus on developing his mental strength and stop wasting time on trivial matters. The upcoming ranking battle between second-tier cities is what you all should be prioritizing. Understood. Jian Cheng responded before taking his leave. He was not surprised at all by Xiao Yihu's indifference toward Star Lake City's promotion. It was indeed unexpected for Star Lake City to get promoted to a second-tier city and for Zero Wing to defeat Skystar City's ace battle group. However, compared to the vast Starlight continent, their achievements remained insignificant. It was especially so in Xiao Yihu's eyes. In his opinion, all of the city battles taking place within Silver Frost City's sphere of activity were nothing more than a fight between children. Even second-tier city battles were not an exception. The only thing that Xiao Yihu was truly concerned about was the Starlight Continent's second-tier ranking battle held by the God's Domain Association once every decade. Everything else was of little significance. Greater God's Domain, Miniature Ancient Worlds World Passage entrance. This should be the place guild leader Shifeng mentioned. Fire Dance, a level 171 assassin wearing a crimson leather jacket and a ponytail, said as she looked at the 17 youths beside her. Azure, you all best not mess around during training. You are here to accept Zero Wings training so that you can pass the Ace Battle Group selection, not to cause trouble. Fire Dance was acquainted with Azure Shadow's group. They had met a few years ago. She had even trained alongside these youths under Mu Huangwu in the past. Therefore, she knew that these 17 youths were rebellious individuals. It was especially so for Azure Shadow. Due to his extraordinary talent, he refused to obey anyone but Mu Huangwu in the Green God Corporation. The Green God Corporation had hired many reputable instructors to rein in Azure Shadow's rebellious attitude in the past. However, none of those instructors managed to last very long before Azure Shadow finished mastering all they had to teach. Azure Shadow had even gone on to defeat each and every one of those instructors in a spar, causing those instructors to leave with injured pride. This situation had given the Green God Corporation a huge headache. We know, Big Sis Fire, Azure Shadow, a level 173 ranger, said as he smiled at Fire Dance. But if we are superior to the person responsible for training us, what qualifications does that person have to train us? Not to mention, we even paid such an exorbitant price for this training. I agree with Azure, Big Sis Fire. You are now a member of Zero Wing, so you get to join this training for free. But the rest of us had to pay a total of 170 God crystals. If Zero Wing's training turns out to be too simple, wouldn't we have wasted all those God crystals? Following Azure Shadow's words, the rest of the youths also started to chime in. At this point, they could already imagine Zero Wing's instructor leaving in dejection after losing to them. You all, Fire Dance experienced a headache when she saw what Azure Shadow and the others were planning to do. She was fully aware of the talent the 17 youths possessed. If not for her having a fortuitous encounter and being with the Green God Corporation for a much longer time, she would have probably lost to Azure Shadow and the others in combat standards long ago. It was especially so for Azure Shadow. The young man was practically a monster. Even when faced with complicated advanced silver combat techniques, Azure Shadow needed no more than a few tries to master them completely. He could even take things a step further and combine them to create his own exclusive techniques. At this point, only fifth-floor experts capable of predicting future moves could beat Azure Shadow in a contest of combat techniques. While Fire Dance was conversing with Azure Shadow's group, a cloaked swordsman approached them. Following this swordsman's appearance, Fire Dance couldn't help but be stunned. Guild Leader Black Flame. TL notes. 1. Singularity, it's a made-up name. Roars is supposed to be singular metal. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know. Report chapter so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 3541, Chapter 615, Crazed Night Watch Members. Chapter 3541, Chapter 615, Crazed Night Watch Members. Chapter 615, Crazed Night Watch Members. Why is he here? Fire Dance couldn't help but doubt her eyes when she saw the cloaked swordsman before her. Black Flame, the 11th ranked player on the Sacred Glory list. This was a name known by all throughout the Greater God's Domain. As for Zero Wing's members, Both Black Flame's name and appearance were deeply ingrained into their minds. While Fire Dance was training alongside Zero Wing's members for the city battle, she had heard plenty of things about Black Flame. Hence, she was considerably familiar with the player named Black Flame. In the Eternal Realm, Black Flame had single-handedly suppressed an army of tens of thousands of Holy Race players. Later on, Black Flame had single-handedly erased the headquarters of 3 upper-ranking hegemonic powers in the miniature ancient world. Aside from achievements, Black Flame was also well-connected. He shared close ties with 3 Golden Masters, and Ink Cheline, a vice-commander of the Scarecrow Fox Adventurer team, even openly expressed her respect toward him. These 4 individuals would also often collaborate with Zero Wing in exploring the Crystal City of Secrets' underground Crystal Palace. At this point, Black Flame could already be considered a legendary figure in the Greater Gods domain. He wasn't someone that the average person could hope to meet. The Lord of War Goddesses. When Azure Shadow saw Shafong, a hint of shock flashed in his eyes. He didn't think Zero Wing would send its true guild leader to come to instruct them. It seems Zero Wing is going all out this time to have its guild leader come to train us personally. No wonder guild leader Shafong asked for such an exorbitant fee. Black Flame's status as the 11th ranked Sacred Glory expert alone already makes the fee worthwhile. When the rest of the Night Watch battle group's members saw that it was Shafong approaching them, they couldn't help but start a hushed discussion among themselves. It was especially so when they felt Shafong, who was only a Tier 5 player, radiating an aura stronger than theirs. While the Sacred Glory list's significance might not be comparable to the Divine Glory list, anyone capable of entering the Sacred Glory list would still be regarded as a VIP in any realm. Not to mention the Green God Corporation, even the average upper-ranking hegemonic power and conglomerate would have difficulty employing the assistance of such individuals. So what if he's ranked 11th on the Sacred Glory list? Azure Shadow said in the team chat. He'll still need to have actual abilities to train us. I guess you're right. After thinking it over, the rest of the Night Watch battle group's members nodded in agreement. Black Flame might be famous, but that wouldn't necessarily mean he was qualified to train them. It was especially so for someone like Black Flame, who relied heavily on external items. The primary reason Black Flame could achieve his current status was due to his ability to summon war goddesses. When it came to actual combat standards, he wouldn't necessarily be superior to them. While Azure Shadow and the others were having a secret discussion among themselves, Shafong briefly swept his gaze across Fire Dance and the 17 youths. Since everyone's here, follow me, Shafong said, chuckling when he saw the 17 youths scrutinizing him. But before we leave, let me remind you that you must keep everything you see later on a secret. Also, as this training is meant for nurturing Zero Wing's internal members, you are only allowed to stay until the Night Watch Legion's Ace Battle Group selection. After that, you will all have to leave. Upon hearing Shafong's reminder, aside from Fire Dance, everyone else present revealed contemptuous expressions. They had experienced all kinds of training in the past. They had even participated in training camps jointly hosted by multiple powerful conglomerates and upper-ranking hegemonic powers. So, they didn't believe, even for a second, that Zero Wing could provide them with any noteworthy training. Yet, Shafong was making Zero Wing's training sound like it was the most precious thing in the world. At this time, Azure Shadow and the others became further resolved to complete whatever training Zero Wing had to offer before the training session was anywhere close to completion. Then, they would take their leave without hesitation. Meanwhile, Shafong did not bother to offer any additional explanations, even when he saw the 17 youths' contemptuous expressions. He simply led the group to a deserted area of the Void Sea and waited for World-Breaking Gate's cooldown to end. Then, he spent another 1,000 units of 7 Luminaries crystal to bring everyone to the Eternal Realm. Starlight Continent, Star Lake City. As the morning sun rose, Star Lake City's airport basked in its brilliance. Even though it had only been a day since Star Lake City had gotten promoted to a second-tier city, the airport was already crowded with supersonic planes from various third-tier cities. Of the guests these supersonic planes carried to Star Lake City, apart from the various powers executives, a significant portion consisted of mental strength grandmasters and budding talents. As Star Lake City was a new second-tier city, It currently didn't face any problems with overpopulation. Hence, these individuals all sought to use this opportunity to secure themselves long-term residence in a second-tier city. Are Azure and the others still not here? Mu Huangwu muttered as he looked out through the airport lounge and at the Green God Corporation's private plane parked outside. If we still don't take off soon, we won't make it for the registration. Mu Huangwu couldn't help but find the tardiness of Azure Shadow and the others strange. After all, his disciples were normally very punctual. Not to mention, they would be flying back to Night Watch City to register for the Night Watch Legion's Ace Battle Group selection this time. If they were to miss the registration period, they would have to wait another year before they could try for an Ace Battle Group again. Did they forget when we were leaving? Xie Qingying, who had come to see Mu Huangwu's group off, similarly found this situation confusing. Mental strength grandmasters had an extremely accurate grasp on time. They could tell the precise time of day, even without looking at the time. Logically, there was no way Azure Shadow and the others would be late when they knew they had to attend an event as important as the Ace Battle Group selection. Impossible, Mu Huangwu firmly denied Xie Qingying's conjecture. I even went out of my way to remind them the time before they logged into God's domain yesterday. Did they get into an accident? When Xie Qingying heard Mu Huangwu's words, she promptly thought of contacting the God's Domain Association. Azure Shadow and the others were mental strength grandmasters. Since it was unlikely they had misremembered their flight's departure time, it must mean they had gotten into an accident. Otherwise, there was no way they would be tardy. But just as Xie Qingying was about to contact the God's Domain Association, a group hastily entered the lounge. "You're finally here." Mu Huangwu sighed in relief when he saw the individuals entering the lounge. "What happened to you all? Why did you arrive so late?" The group of new arrivals was none other than Azure Shadow's group. Only, at this moment, Azure Shadow and the others wore anxious looks on their faces, their usual calm nowhere to be seen. "Let's quickly board the plane, Elder Mu. It'll be bad if we're late," Azure Shadow hurriedly said to Mu Huangwu. The other members of the Night Watch battle group nodded in agreement, their anxious expressions making it seem like they couldn't wait even a moment longer to board the plane. "So you actually know you're late?" Mu Huangwu couldn't help but feel exasperated when he saw the anxious expressions of Azure Shadow and the others. "You're lucky you made it in time. Had you all arrived any later, you would have missed the registration period. You misunderstand, Elder Mu. We're not talking about the Ace Battle Group selection," Azure Shadow hurriedly said. "We already made an appointment with the instructor. The instructor will only wait half an hour for us. We only have a minute left, so we must board the plane and log into God's domain immediately. Otherwise, we're going to be late. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know. Report chapter so we can fix it as soon as possible." Chapter 3542, Chapter 616, Zero Wings Training. Chapter 3542, Chapter 616, Zero Wings Training. Chapter 616, Zero Wings Training. Mu Huangwu was so stunned by Azure Shadow's words that he forgot what he was going to say. As for Xie Qingying, she similarly couldn't help but doubt if something was wrong with her ears. After all, just a day ago, Azure Shadow and the others had expressed strong hostilities and contempt toward Zero Wings Training. Yet, they were now worried they might be late for training. "Let's talk another time. We're going to be late." When Azure Shadow saw that Mu Huangwu and Xie Qingying were unresponsive, he charged out of the boarding gate without hesitation. Seeing this, the other members of the Night Watch battle group also followed suit, leaving behind Mu Huangwu in the waiting lounge. "Can you tell me what's going on, Qingying?" Mu Huangwu asked as he stared at the boarding gate with a stunned expression. Anyone could tell that Azure Shadow and the others looked forward to participating in Zero Wings Training. But even if they were to look forward to Zero Wings Training, it didn't make sense for them to look forward to it that much. It should be known that it was to the extent that they prioritized it even more than becoming aces in the Night Watch Legion. At this moment, Mu Huangwu even suspected that if Azure Shadow and the others were made to choose between joining the Night Watch Legion's ace battle groups or participating in Zero Wings Training, they would choose the latter without hesitation. "I have no idea, either," Xia Qingying said with a wry smile. While she might be privy to some of Zero Wing's secrets, she highly doubted that something like the intermediate divine engraving could garner much interest from Azure Shadow and the others. But looking at the reactions Azure Shadow and the others had toward Zero Wing's training, it was already to a point where she could describe them as fanatical. Otherwise, they wouldn't have cast aside Mu Huangwu just so that they could avoid being late for training. Eternal Realm, Western Continent, Nameless City. After boarding the Green God Corporation's private plane, Azure Shadow and the others promptly hopped into the temporary virtual gaming cabins the corporation had prepared on the plane and logged into God's domain. Then, when they saw that Zero Wing's members were still resting around them, they couldn't help but sigh in relief. Thank goodness we made it back in time, Azure Shadow thought when he saw Shifeng sorting through items nearby. Before arriving at the Nameless City, Azure Shadow, as someone who had trained in the Galaxy Conglomerate's Holy Land in the past, felt that no other place could compare to said Holy Land. However, he instantly changed his mind after arriving at the Nameless City. Compared to the Nameless City, the Galaxy Conglomerate's Holy Land was nothing more than a cheap knockoff. Every corner of the Nameless City was brimming with eternal energy. Simply standing in the city allowed him to experience gradual but continuous improvement. He even felt that he could achieve a breakthrough at any moment. However, the training Shifeng provided them was even more valuable compared to the Nameless City's environment. The Bronze Mana Purification Technique. This was a technique that could allow their mana to achieve a qualitative improvement. Before today, he had never even heard of such a technique existing. Simply gaining an initial mastery over the Bronze Mana Purification Technique made him feel he could fight against Tier 6 experts fully clad in legendary weapons and equipment. Yet, what was even more unbelievable was that there was something even better than the Bronze Mana Purification Technique. Unfortunately, as he and the others weren't internal members of Zero Wing and all of the loot they acquired belonged to Zero Wing, they currently couldn't learn the advanced Bronze Purification Technique. If they wanted to learn it, they would have to kill a certain number of regional bosses and use their contributions to exchange one. However, while their group of 17 was currently capable of moving independently of Zero Wing's group, they weren't familiar with the Nameless City's terrain. So, it would be much more effective if they searched for regional bosses with Zero Wing's group. Not to mention, Shifeng would demonstrate flowing space from time to time. This presented them with an opportunity to watch and learn a gold combat technique up close. Gold combat techniques were incredibly rare in the Greater God's domain. The various powers would treat the gold combat techniques they owned as heirlooms, and they would rarely ever share these techniques with outsiders. If outsiders wished to learn these techniques, they could only do so through watching battle videos, which was a nigh impossible task. This was due to the complexity of gold combat techniques. When players fought using gold combat techniques, they would usually only utilize fragments of the technique. Unless a player was willing to thoroughly demonstrate their gold combat technique, others would never be able to learn their technique's intricacies. Meanwhile, when Shifeng fought, he would always execute his gold combat technique from start to end for them to observe. Typically, this was a treatment only the paragons of pseudo-apex and apex powers could receive. If they were to miss this opportunity, they would absolutely regret it for the rest of their lives. Alright, everyone, get organized. Since everyone's back, we'll begin exploring the core region, Shifeng commanded when he saw Azure Shadow and the others returning. After fighting and learning for the entirety of last night, Azure Shadow's group had already mastered the common mana purification technique and begun to learn the bronze version. With their present combat power, it would be a waste not to explore the Nameless City's core region. The Nameless City could be categorized into 4 regions: outer, inner, central, and core. Since yesterday, they have been exploring the central region and have acquired a good harvest. Overall, they obtained 14 copies of the Advanced Bronze Purification Technique and 41 copies of the Bronze Purification Technique. Even without the help of the War Goddesses, their grinding efficiency was better than when they had the War Goddesses' assistance. However, for a regional dungeon of the Nameless City's rank, the core region would typically have many more regional bosses spawning within it than in the central region. There might even be Tier 6 divine bosses guarding the place. Divine regional bosses were incredibly rare in the Greater God's domain. They also had a long respawn time and were the primary target of contention between the various powers. Meanwhile, the Nameless City had only appeared not long ago. It was still in its exploration phase, hence its monsters had such a high drop rate. If they were to miss this exploration phase, even if Zero Wing could mobilize more experts to slay the Nameless City's divine regional bosses later on, their harvest might not even come close to their harvest in the current central region. After everyone organized themselves, they began advancing toward the Nameless City's core region under Shifeng's command. After 4 hours of constant fighting, Shifeng and the others arrived at the Nameless City's core region. A thin layer of mist covered the entire core region, making it impossible for those outside to see or sense the situation inside. However, the instant everyone stepped into the mist, they promptly realized how wondrous of a location this was. The density of the eternal energy in the core region was more than double that of the central region. Only, before Shifeng and the others could take their time to enjoy the significantly denser eternal energy, they saw a female swordsman of the human race running in their direction with a 1,000-man Holy Race Legion chasing after her. The swordsman in question was incredible. Despite being only a level 165, Tier 5, Sword Saint, she continuously neutralized the attacks launched at her by the Tier 5 Holy Race experts. It should be known that these Holy Race experts could rival Tier 6 human players when empowered by their holy auras. Moreover, over 100 of them could attack the human female at a time. Yet, the most they managed to do was cause some minor damage to the human female. Even experts who had mastered gold footwork and defensive combat techniques would find difficult to achieve a similar combat performance as the human female. "That swordsman is amazing," Gentle Snow exclaimed as she watched the human female repeatedly breaking out of the Holy Race player's encirclement. Even if Big Sis Chilene gets promoted into a Tier 6 Guardian Knight, she wouldn't fare much better against so many Holy Race experts. Billowing water? Shifeng couldn't help but be surprised when he saw who the human female was. "Why is she here? If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know. Report chapter so we can fix it as soon as possible." Chapter 3543, Chapter 617, 17 Tier 6 Players. Chapter 3543, Chapter 617, 17 Tier 6 Players. Chapter 617, 17 Tier 6 Players. The Blaze Conglomerate's Heart Sword? When Azure Shadow heard the name that came out of Shifeng's mouth, he couldn't help but be surprised. "Do you know Miss Billowing Water, Instructor Black Flame?" Azure Shadow was fortunate enough to participate in a training camp hosted by the Galaxy Conglomerate in the past. While there, he had heard many tales of a monstrous talent capable of rivaling Fry, the Galaxy Conglomerate's fourth princess. Meanwhile, the monstrously talented person was the Blaze Conglomerate's eldest young Miss Weylan, aka Billowing Water. Although Billowing Water currently only ranked within the Sacred Glory List's top 100, she was one of the few experts capable of fighting Golden Masters despite having mastered no gold combat techniques herself. Because of her capabilities, many God's Domain critics have commented that Billowing Water could absolutely rank among the Divine Glory List in the future. "I guess you can say that we are partners of sorts," Shifeng answered after giving the question some thought. "We were part of the same team previously, and we conducted a couple of transactions." Upon hearing Shifeng's answer, Azure Shadow and the others couldn't help but cast looks of admiration at Shifeng. Billowing Water was the Blaze Conglomerate's first successor. She was a big shot who even Nightwatch City's City Lord would have little chance to come into contact with. And even if they were to meet, it was unlikely they could find a common topic to talk about, let alone become partners and conduct transactions. While big shots like Billowing Water might require a lot of resources in both the Greater God's Domain and the Greater World, these resources were not things that the average person could access. Anyone who could provide these resources were bound to be extraordinary individuals. "Should we help her, Guild Leader?" Gentle Snow asked when she saw Billowing Water getting surrounded once again. It might not seem like Billowing Water was in any life-threatening danger, but that would only be true for now. Once all of the 1,000 Holy Race experts managed to encircle her completely, Billowing Water would no longer have any opportunities to break through. Not to mention, as the fight dragged on, The noise made would most certainly attract the attention of nearby holy race players. At that time, many more holy race experts would join the chase. The only way Billowing Water could truly escape her current predicament was if she could quickly kill all 1,000 of the holy race experts chasing after her. But, evidently, she couldn't accomplish that by herself. Since we've met, we naturally have to help out. Let's go, Shifeng said, nodding. If Shifeng wasn't acquainted with Billowing Water, he would have most likely chosen to turn a blind eye to her predicament. After all, the Western continent was the holy race's territory. It was especially so for the Nameless City. Engaging one of the holy race's player legions here wouldn't be wise. So long as a fight broke out, they would have to face endless harassment from nearby holy race experts, and they would be unable to explore the Nameless City properly. However, since Billowing Water was one of his partners, Shifeng naturally couldn't just stand by and watch the holy race experts kill her. Subsequently, under Shifeng's command, everyone swiftly advanced toward Billowing Water's location. Although Shifeng and the others did not make any noise in their approach, because their team had over 30 members, their approach quickly attracted the attention of Billowing Water and the holy race experts attacking her. Run away! Quickly run away! When Billowing Water saw Shifeng among the group of human players approaching her, she didn't relax. On the contrary, her expression turned even grimmer as she shouted for Shifeng's group to run away. These aren't your average holy race players. Quickly head back to Seven Luminaries Town and inform everyone that the holy race has already found a way to break the town's defenses. Seven Luminaries Town is their next target. How dare you humans trespass on our territory? None of you should think of leaving with your lives, the commander of the Holy Race Legion, a level 167 beast berserker, bellowed when he saw Shifeng's approaching group. Everyone, split up and surround the new trespassers. I'll keep this woman pinned. We must not let them spread the news. Following the beast berserker's command, the entire legion of holy race experts quickly cast aside Billowing Water and switched their attention toward Shifeng's team. Close to 100 party and team leader-ranked holy race experts charged straight toward Shifeng's team, while the rest of the legion split up to form an encirclement. When Billowing Water saw this, her expression quickly turned ugly. The legion pursuing her was unlike any other. Even the legion's party leaders possessed strength rivaling Moon Bamboo, the Dawnlight Party's vice party leader, while the legion's team leaders rivaled Sky Pivot, the Dawnlight Party's party leader. If not for her encountering a fortuitous opportunity in the Nameless City's core region, which allowed her to repair a significant portion of her fragmented divine weapon, she would have long been killed by this extraordinary legion. Unfortunately, Billowing Water couldn't afford to get distracted any longer as she needed to focus on surviving against the Holy Race Legion's commander. A Beast Berserker. The Beast Berserker class was a peak class among the Holy Race. But despite its lower rank, it was superior to even the human race's saint classes. Previously, in order to cover for Billowing Water's escape, Sky Pivot and Moon Bamboo had chosen to face the Beast Berserker in a frontal confrontation. However, after only 3 exchanges, Sky Pivot and Moon Bamboo fell. They didn't even manage to distract the Beast Berserker for 5 seconds. The other party's strength was beyond terrifying. Immediately, Billowing Water gathered her scattered formless twilight and transformed it into a great sword, the weapon's mere presence destabilizing the surrounding space. With the great sword in hand, Billowing Water's strength had also increased substantially. Now, her strength was slightly superior to even level 170 divine monsters. Escape is no longer an option for you all, the Beast Berserker said. However, instead of hurrying to eliminate Billowing Water, he turned to look at Shifeng's team and sneered. Since you dared to steal that item from us, I will show you the consequences of meddling with our affairs. When the Beast Berserker commander finished speaking, the Holy Race Legion's party and team leaders had already arrived within 100 yards of Shifeng's team. 4 Tier 5 players, this was a distance that could be crossed in a single breath. This should be close enough. Everyone, take action, Shifeng commanded when he saw the remaining distance between his team and the Holy Race Legion's party and team leaders. Upon receiving Shifeng's command, Azure Shadow and the others promptly stopped concealing their information and auras with their black cloaks. Immediately, 17 illusory worlds descended upon the street and overlapped each other. At the same time, frightening divine might swept across the entire street, briefly causing all Holy Race players within a 3,000-yard radius to lose focus. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know. Report chapter so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 3544, Chapter 618, Fear and Panic. Chapter 3544, Chapter 618, Fear and Panic. Chapter 618, Fear and Panic. Tier 6? They're Tier 6 players. 17 Tier 6 players? How is this possible? The moment the amalgamation of divine might washed over the Holy Race experts, they all fell into a daze as their minds started to doubt the reality of their current situation. Tier 6 players. Whether it was for the human race or the Holy Race, Tier 6 players were existences who had secured a hold over the laws of the world. Hence, it was extremely difficult for players to get promoted to Tier 6. In the current Eternal Realm, most experts wouldn't dare to attempt the Tier 6 promotion unless they were confident in success. This was because failure to get promoted would force players into a long state of rest, and it would be a considerable amount of time before they could make their next attempt. By the time they recovered, other experts would have long surpassed them, and they would be forced to retire from the Eternal Realm's main stage. Not to mention, the energy resources required to challenge the Tier 6 promotion were immense. Even for the Holy Race, they could only afford to let a few people challenge the Tier 6 promotion. Yet, it was now revealed that among the human team consisting of only a little over 30 members, 17 of them had actually gotten promoted to Tier 6 already. Who could possibly accept this situation? Even if all 17 humans were the weakest Tier 6 players in existence, they would still be considered a frightening force in the current nameless city. They would be more than enough to go up against their legion of 1,000. Not to mention, these 17 human players weren't by any means weak for Tier 6 players. On the contrary, they were far above the average, each being stronger than Tier 6 divine monsters of the same level. After all, simply the act of these 17 players releasing their divine might was enough to affect their entire legion's mobility. This situation was no different than if they were to go up against the Holy Race's Tier 6 experts. Impossible. How can the humans have 17 Tier 6 players? The Beast Berserker, the Holy Race Legion's commander, was similarly dumbfounded as he looked at Azure Shadow's group in the distance. Even until now, none of the Holy Race's various powers had managed to produce a Tier 6 player. Meanwhile, according to their investigation, the human race should be faring even worse than them. Yet, now, 17 Tier 6 human players had appeared on the Western continent, which was supposed to be the Holy Race's home ground. Am I dreaming? Billowing Water, who had prepared herself to fight to the death, couldn't help but rub her eyes as she looked at Azure Shadow's group. She felt that she must be dreaming. It was currently the goal of the Eternal Realm's various powers to produce a Tier 6 player as soon as possible. But according to the information she received, even the various Apex powers had yet to accomplish this goal. So, the only explanation she could come up with for this situation was that she was in a dream. The Holy Race's experts, huh? Azure Shadow revealed a look of excitement as he gazed upon the Holy Race experts before him. Just in time. I can use you all to test my improvements. After saying so, Azure Shadow narked his longbow and launched a series of arrows into the sky. At the same time, a magic array covering a 1,000-yard radius formed in the sky. Tier 6 skill, Stars from Heaven. Azure Shadow had heard from Shi Feng the strength of the Holy Race when they first arrived at the Nameless City. Hence, he wasn't ignorant of the circumstances surrounding the Holy Race. Under the same tier, human experts would have difficulty competing against Holy Race experts. Tier 5 Holy Race experts capable of using Holy Aura could even transcend tiers to fight Tier 6 human players. Based on his senses, he could tell that the team leader-ranked Holy Race players before him were undoubtedly such experts. If he were to clash with any one of these team leaders when he first arrived at the Nameless City, their fight would be intense, and it would take him a considerable amount of time to kill them. If several of these team leaders attacked him simultaneously, he might even be in danger of losing his life. Now, though, these party and team leader-ranked holy race experts were no longer a threat to him or his companions. Instead, these holy race experts had become the most suitable targets for them to familiarize themselves with their newfound strength. Meanwhile, the instant the magic array in the sky finished forming, countless space-rending arrows began to rain down from the sky, the spatial tears they left in their wake creating a scene resembling the arrival of the apocalypse. Boom! 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 Countless explosions echoed in the nameless city's core region, the explosions lasting for 10 whole seconds before coming to an end. When the dust clouds created by the arrow rain scattered, they revealed a desolate wasteland amidst the tall buildings decorating the nameless city's core region. As for the holy race experts who previously populated the street, their numbers had been reduced from 1,000 to less than 100, and even the ones still standing looked incredibly miserable. Have I become so powerful already? Azure Shadow couldn't help but be taken aback by the devastation he caused. His original intention for using stars from heaven was to break the holy race experts' formation so his teammates could pick off the stragglers. This was the tactic they normally employed when fighting against groups of players or monsters. After all, each arrow in stars from heaven only carried 70% of his strength. It was only because of the skill's large number of projectiles that it could pose a certain degree of threat to Tier 6 experts. Yet, the effects of his stars from heaven vastly surpassed his expectations. Despite being an ordinary Tier 6 skill, it achieved a result surpassing even that of Tier 6 curses cast by Tier 6 mage gods. Each arrow exhibited power at the Tier 6 peak standard. For a moment, he even suspected he could threaten a Tier 6 god's life with this Tier 6 skill. Are you on drugs, Azure? How in heaven did you do that? Dawn Arrow, another ranger from the Night Watch battle group, asked in astonishment. Stars from heaven was a common Tier 6 skill of the ranger class. Hence, Dawn Arrow was very familiar with the skill's capabilities. Normally, the skill would only be enough to tickle Tier 6 divine monsters and damage Tier 5 legendary monsters slightly. While it might be more effective against players, it shouldn't be anywhere close to being life-threatening to the holy race experts. However, it was a completely different story for Azure Shadow's stars from heaven. In Azure Shadow's hands, the skill performed no differently than the Tier 6 Curse Star Blast. Had Azure Shadow used this move outside the Eternal Realm, he might even be able to delete an entire map. What kind of drug do you think I would have to take to get such an effect? Azure Shadow answered, rolling his eyes. Also, we train and operate together all the time. What don't you know about me? This won't do. I'm going to try it as well. Dawn Arrow said before copying Azure Shadow in using stars from heaven. Meanwhile, as soon as Dawn Arrow used his skill, the surviving holy race experts couldn't help but despair. Each arrow they previously faced carried power at the Tier 6 peak standard. Normally, even a divine monster would become heavily injured after being rained upon by so many such arrows. They only managed to survive the projectile bombardment because they had used all of their life-saving skills. Yet, as soon as they finished surviving the rain of arrows, they had to face it again. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know. Report chapter so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 3545, Chapter 619, Tier Difference. Chapter 3545, Chapter 619, Tier Difference. Chapter 619, Tier Difference. Despicable humans. Don't you dare look down on the holy race. When the Beast Berserker commander saw a second stars from heaven being used, he unleashed his holy aura and transformed into a giant measuring several hundred meters in height. The giant was clad in armor and wielded 4 axes with its 2 sets of arms. The giant looked like a titan from primordial times, and every one of his movements caused space to tear. Immediately after appearing on the battlefield, the primordial titan spun his body and created a whirlwind with his axes, causing the countless descending arrows to scatter and devastate the surrounding street and buildings. A beast berserker. When Shi Feng saw the primordial titan neutralizing Dawn Arrow stars from heaven, a hint of surprise flashed across his eyes. The beast berserker class was a peak class among the holy race. It was an incredibly rare class with stringent requirements. Even among the holy race, Few beast berserkers existed. Meanwhile, unlike the human race's peak classes, the holy race's peak classes not only offered players a larger variety of class skills, but they also offered players talents that could grant them unimaginable combat power. In the case of the beast berserker class, its talent was called ancestral manifestation. Depending on the level of mastery players had over their holy aura, the size and strength of their ancestral manifestation would differ. For example, an ancestral manifestation that was several hundred meters tall would be slightly stronger than the average divine monster. If an ancestral manifestation reached 1,000 meters tall, its strength would rival the Tier 6 gods. At the same time as the Beast Berserker commander neutralized Dawn Arrow stars from heaven, Dawn Arrow and Azure Shadow promptly followed up with more Tier 6 skills. Tier 6 skill, Scattered Explosions. Tier 6 skill, Strike from Heaven. Scattered explosions could transform the user's arrows into AoE attacks and be impossible to block. Moreover, the higher the skill completion rate, the greater the power and AoE of the attacks would be. As for Strike from Heaven, it would transform the user into an arrow and launch it at a speed that triumphed over all ranger skills. Meanwhile, the higher the skill completion rate, the faster and stronger the arrow would be. When Dawn Arrow and Azure Shadow saw the Beast Berserker neutralize Dawn Arrow stars from heaven, they instantly knew they wouldn't be a match for the other party in a one-on-one situation. The gap in combat standards simply wasn't something they could hope to bridge with their enhanced mana and advantage in tier. If they wanted to beat the Beast Berserker, their only option would be to work together and rely on their advantage in skills. Thanks to the bronze mana purification technique they learned, not only did the raw power of their skills increase significantly, but even their skill completion rates had reached an unprecedented high. Previously, the best they could achieve was an 85% skill completion rate with their Tier 6 skills. Now, they could use their Tier 6 skills at a completion rate of 90% or above, which, in turn, allowed their skills to exhibit power comparable to the standard of Tier 6 gods. Hence, even though the Beast Berserker had tried his best to avoid the attacks from Dawn Arrow's scattered explosions with his superior combat standards, his gigantic ancestral manifestation still ended up getting caught within the large AoE of multiple explosions, causing him to lose a significant amount of HP. At the same time, Azure Shadow, while in his Strike from Heaven form, executed the advanced silver combat technique Thousand Mirages and repeatedly struck the defensive ancestral manifestation, causing the other party to stumble time and again. After this cycle was repeated only 3 times, the Beast Berserker with superior combat standards succumbed to Dawn Arrow's and Azure Shadow's overwhelming Tier 6 skills and fell. He died, just like that. Billowing Water couldn't believe her eyes when she saw the Beast Berserker's body scattering into particles of light. Although she had long guessed this outcome, she still couldn't help but be a little shocked when she saw how effortlessly the Beast Berserker got killed. Meanwhile, a moment after the Beast Berserker got killed, the Night Watch Battlegroup's other members also finished eliminating the Holy Race Legion's surviving party and team leaders and started to collect the loot the Holy Race players dropped. "Why are you here, Miss Billow? Didn't you teleport away with party leader Pivot and the others before?" Shifeng asked as he approached Billowing Water. Level 170+ legendary regional bosses roamed the Nameless City's core region. Many Holy Race legions also operated in this region. It simply wasn't a place Billowing Water could operate in by herself, so he found it strange to find her here by herself. Hearing Shifeng's question, Billowing Water wryly smiled and answered, "Our random teleportation brought us to the core region. Seeing it was a rare opportunity, we decided to explore the area cautiously. Not long ago, we coincidentally came across several tens of thousands of Holy Race experts raiding a level 175 divine-ranked Guardian Dragon. When the Guardian Dragon died, it dropped about a dozen incredible items. At the same time, its death undid the seal of a six-eyed god from the Holy Race. After being freed, the six-eyed god signed a contract with the Holy Race's various powers. Based on what we heard, so long as the various powers can sacrifice a certain number of human players to the six-eyed god, they could obtain great strength. Originally, we wanted to bring this information back to Seven Luminaries Town, but the Holy Race's god discovered us. Although we were fortunate enough to snatch 2 of the dropped items, we later got chased by the Holy Race Legion, and only I managed to survive until this point. The holy race's various powers signed a contract with a six-eyed god. Shifeng couldn't help but frown when he heard Billowing Water's recollection. The holy race's gods came in all shapes and sizes. But out of all the holy race gods he knew of, only one had 6 eyes. The soul-eating ancestor. The soul-eating ancestor was a god who grew stronger by devouring the immortal souls of human players. At the same time, it could grant holy race players bloodlines of higher purity, allowing them to improve much more quickly than human players. In addition, the soul-eating ancestor was one of the strongest holy race gods who had led the attack on the greater god's domain's 12 sanctuaries. However, according to Shifeng's knowledge, it should still be several years before the holy race players unseal the soul-eating ancestor. The fact that the soul-eating ancestor was unsealed so soon in this timeline definitely wasn't good news for the human race. Now that the holy race's various powers had the soul-eating ancestor's assistance, they could rapidly grow stronger so long as they kept sacrificing human players. In contrast, human players could only rely on gradual exploration of the Eternal Realm to uncover stronger legacies. It should be known that the First Holy Mana War would begin in the not-so-distant future. If this situation continued, Shifeng couldn't even begin to imagine what would happen to the human race at that time. I really have to thank you for saving me this time, Guild Leader Black Flame. Otherwise, I would have had to suffer the same fate as Party Leader Pivot and the others, Billowing Water said gratefully. Then, she couldn't help but turn to look at Azure Shadow and the other Tier 6 players of Shifeng's team and asked, also, would you be willing to negotiate a deal with the Blaze Conglomerate, Guild Leader Black Flame? Although she didn't know what kind of relationship these 17 Tier 6 experts shared with Shifeng, the fact that Shifeng could gather 17 Tier 6 experts in the Eternal Realm was more than enough for the Blaze Conglomerate to take Shifeng very seriously. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know. Report chapter so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 3546, Chapter 620, Zero Wings Value. Chapter 3546, Chapter 620, Zero Wings Value. Chapter 620, Zero Wings Value. A deal? With the Blaze Conglomerate. Shifeng couldn't help but grow curious when he heard Billowing Water's somewhat urgent tone. Previously, Billowing Water had only dealt with him in a personal capacity. Yet, she was now proposing a business transaction to him on behalf of the Blaze Conglomerate. So, the significance of the deal was undoubtedly much greater. Yes. A deal with the Blaze Conglomerate, Billowing Water said, smiling slightly when she saw a hint of interest appearing on Shifeng's face. Do you remember the floating island we visited before coming to the Forbidden Zone, Guild Leader Black Flame? I do. We teleported to the Western continent from that floating island, Shifeng said, nodding and feeling a little confused as he looked at Billowing Water. The Eternal Temple, situated on the floating island, was vital for human players to travel from the Eternal Continent to the Western continent. However, he failed to see what business they could discuss regarding that floating island. After all, the island was currently under the 7 Luminaries Alliance's control, and all of the island's profits belonged to the Alliance. As you can see, there are many benefits to be had on the Western Island. Taking her time, Billowing Water smiled and explained, meanwhile, the number of powers that know about the secrets here is increasing by the day. I believe it won't be long before many players will know about the Western continent. And as luck would have it, the Blaze Conglomerate has discovered an island roughly 2 hours away from the floating island by flight. We have also gone ahead and established a guild city on the island. When Shifeng heard Billowing Water's revelation, although he remained calm on the surface, he was inwardly shocked by the news. In the current Eternal Realm, the various powers had trouble even establishing themselves in the various NPC cities. As for constructing their own guild city out in the fields, nobody had managed to do so thus far due to the stringent requirements. Firstly, to construct a guild city in the Eternal Realm, a guild would have to obtain a city-building order. However, city-building orders could only be acquired by killing level 160+ world bosses in the Eternal Realm, and such bosses were extremely rare in the Eternal Realm. And even if players did manage to find and kill a level 160+ world boss, the city-building order wasn't guaranteed to drop. Secondly, a guild would need to have sufficient funds to construct. This wasn't just an expense of several thousand eternal gold coins they were talking about. Without at least 100,000 eternal gold, a guild shouldn't even consider constructing a guild city in the eternal realm. Even for the various pseudo-apex powers, they would need a considerable amount of time to amass such a fortune. Hence, in the current eternal realm, owning a guild city was a luxury that even the 9 great pseudo-apex powers could not afford, let alone the Blaze conglomerate. For now, we have already completed the groundwork for the guild city's construction. However, with how valuable the city is, even if we expend all of our defensive measures, I'm afraid we won't be able to defend our ownership, Billowing Water added with a wry smile. To this, Shifeng nodded in agreement. Currently, the only known way for human players to travel to the Western continent was through the 7 Luminaries Alliance's Eternal Temple. However, if players wished to enter the floating island, they would have to pay the 7 Luminaries Alliance a fee of 150 eternal gold, regardless if they wished to utilize the Eternal Temple's teleportation services. Because of this, it simply wasn't possible for players to stay there long-term. If a guild city existed near the floating island, it would make it much more convenient for the various powers and players. Such a guild city could even become a trade hub for the Eternal and Western continents, and its value would be unimaginable. If any pseudo-apex power were to learn of the guild city's existence, they definitely wouldn't mind snatching it from the Blaze conglomerate. And with the Blaze conglomerate's current strength, there was no way it could defend the city from the various pseudo-apex powers. Which is why we have decided to find strong partners, Billowing Water said as she took on a more serious expression. We have already come into an agreement with 2 pseudo-apex powers not long ago. If we include Zero Wing, I believe we should have no problems defending the guild city. Previously, Billowing Water did not have an optimistic view of the guild named Zero Wing. In her opinion, Black Flame was the only noteworthy individual in the guild. But after seeing the 17 Tier 6 experts on Shifeng's team, even if they were only hired hands, the fact that Zero Wing could hire helpers of such caliber was already enough for the Blaze conglomerate to take Zero Wing seriously. Not to mention, seeing how respectfully Azure Shadow and the others behaved toward Shifeng, it was obvious the 2 parties shared a close connection. The city in question indeed has unlimited potential. But what kind of price is the Blaze conglomerate willing to pay? Shifeng asked after pondering over the offer. If Zero Wing agrees to the partnership, Billowing Water paused, taking a moment to think. I can promise you 20% of the city's profits. 20%? Shifeng shook his head. That is a lot, but it still isn't enough for Zero Wing. If you want Zero Wing's help, in addition to the 20%, Zero Wing will require a guild residence slot and 10 shops located in the city center. Isn't that a little too much? Billowing Water couldn't help but hesitate. The 2 pseudo-apex powers that had agreed to partner with the Blaze conglomerate had only asked for 20% of the city's profits and a few shops in the city center. The Blaze conglomerate had promised neither of them a guild residence slot. After all, a basic guild city only had 3 guild residence slots. In such a situation, these precious slots should only be given to integral allies. Not at all. Zero Wing's value far exceeds this price, Shifeng said, chuckling. Then, he took out several dozen copies of the bronze mana purification technique and continued, I believe you should know the difference between an expert who has learned a bronze purification technique and an expert who hasn't, right? When Billowing Water saw the stack of books Shifeng took out, her mind froze momentarily. She naturally knew of the bronze mana purification technique's preciousness. Even in the Nameless City, it wasn't an easy task to acquire a copy. Not to mention, any Tier 5 player who had learned the bronze mana purification technique would immediately gain Tier 6 combat power. In other words, what Shifeng had in his hands was the ability to instantly create several dozen Tier 6 combatants. Your conditions have exceeded my jurisdiction. After hesitating for a moment, Billowing Water said, I cannot give you an answer right away. I will have to discuss with the conglomerate's executives first. Sure. Shifeng nodded, unsurprised by Billowing Water's reply. Billowing Water might be the Blaze conglomerate's first successor, but she still wasn't the conglomerate's helmsman. Meanwhile, Only the helmsman could approve such an important decision. Successors like Billowing Water could, at most, cast votes on the matter. Following this, Billowing Water left the core region by herself and hurried over to the teleportation passage located in the city center. She intended to inform Seven Luminaries Town regarding the Holy Race's plans before logging off to discuss Zero Wings partnership conditions with the conglomerate's executives. Meanwhile, shortly after Billowing Water left, Zero Wings members also finished collecting the items the Holy Race players dropped. "We're done collecting the loot," guild leader Gentle Snow said excitedly as she approached Shafong, who had been resting his eyes while in deep thought. "These Holy Race players are incredibly wealthy. It's especially so for their commander. He's practically a walking treasure trove." After saying so, Gentle Snow took out a bunch of items, the appearance of the items immediately causing the eternal energy in a several hundred-yard radius to double in density. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know. Report chapter so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 3547, Chapter 621, Eternal Magic Armor. Chapter 3547, Chapter 621, Eternal Magic Armor. Chapter 621, Eternal Magic Armor. These are eternal god crystals? Shafong couldn't help but doubt his eyes when he saw the piles of purple-black crystals Gentle Snow took out. Eternal god crystals. This was a rare kind of god crystal found in the Eternal Realm. While it might be different from the god crystals acquired by human players in the Greater God's domain, it possessed all the effects and functions of the standard god crystal. In addition, unlike ordinary god crystals, eternal god crystals could be absorbed by players. Ordinary god crystals were crystals made from concentrating the power of gods. The creation of each god crystal required a god to expend a significant amount of their power. Meanwhile, not only could these god crystals be used to help gods recover their power quickly, but they could also be used to repair weapons and equipment created by gods. Eternal god crystals, on the other hand, were different. They were naturally occurring crystals found only in the Eternal Realm. Hence, even Tier 1 players could make use of eternal god crystals. So long as a player absorbed an eternal god crystal, not only could they receive bursts of inspiration for a short period, but their concentration and mana perception standards would also be temporarily increased by 1 rank. Whether players were looking to construct a mana body or a divine body, eternal god crystals could provide them with extraordinary assistance. Meanwhile, the rarity of eternal god crystals far exceeded ordinary god crystals and fragmented legendary items. Because of this, the market value of eternal god crystals could easily reach 3 ordinary god crystals per eternal god crystal during Shafong's previous life. Even then, few players would be willing to part with their eternal god crystals at this price. However, while eternal god crystals offered many benefits, they also had a glaring flaw: they would drop on death, and they could not be stored in warehouses for long periods. Players must carry their eternal god crystals on them or use them quickly. Currently, Shafong counted at least 400 eternal god crystals piled up before him. This was even more than the total number of eternal god crystals he had seen throughout his previous life. "I've already tallied everything up. We obtained a total of 435 eternal god crystals," Hidden Soul said excitedly as she walked over to Shafong and Gentle Snow. Besides that, the Holy Race commander also dropped an eternal magic armor equipment set design. It is a fragmented legendary equipment set that can be used to form bronze battle arrays when present in large numbers. If we have 20 sets in a team, we can form a small bronze battle array. If we have 100 sets, we can form a medium bronze battle array. If we have 500 sets, we can form a large bronze battle array. If we can equip a team of 500 Tier 5 players with these sets, killing even Tier 6 gods won't be out of the question. Honestly, I can't figure out why that Holy Race commander would carry such a priceless treasure on him. The Eternal Magic Armor's design? Shafong couldn't help but quickly read through the thick book Gentle Snow just took out. The Eternal Magic Armor equipment set's name rang loudly in the Greater God's domain during his previous life. It was an equipment set rivaling the Seven Luminaries Alliance's Luminous set. In fact, in terms of basic attributes, it even surpassed the Luminous set. Moreover, unlike the Luminous set, the Eternal Magic Armor equipment set could be used by both human and holy race players. The only problem was that the production of the Eternal Magic Armor equipment set required eternal god crystals. Mass-producing the set was simply too difficult of a feat to accomplish. As far as he knew, only 3 full batches of 500 sets had ever been made, of which 2 batches belonged to the holy race, while 1 batch belonged to the Eternal Chamber of Commerce. Seeing that the Holy Race commander had dropped the Eternal Magic Armor equipment set design, Shifeng had reason to believe that the other party didn't even bother to inspect the loot he acquired from the Guardian Dragon before pursuing Billowing Water and the rest of the Dawnlight party. Otherwise, there was no way he would carry such a priceless treasure on him and risk losing it. He would have definitely chosen to store it in a warehouse for safekeeping right away. As expected of the Eternal Magic Armor equipment set. Just producing 1 set costs 6 Eternal God Crystals. Most of the Apex powers back then probably can't even afford to produce 500 sets. Shifeng couldn't help but be astonished when he finished studying the design. The Eternal Magic Armor equipment set was a 6-piece set with a relatively low production difficulty. The average Grandmaster Forger could probably manufacture it at a considerably high success rate. The other materials required to produce the set were also easy to source. The only real problem was the Eternal God Crystals required. He would need 3,000 Eternal God Crystals if he wanted to produce a full batch of 500 sets. Even if he counted both his previous and present lives, he had never seen such an amount. Let's hurry back to the Crystal City, Guild Leader. It's not safe here, Gentle Snow suggested. If the Holy Race players find out what they've lost, they definitely won't let us go. Although she didn't know how the Holy Race viewed Eternal God Crystals, even a fool could tell the value of the Eternal Magic Armor equipment set design. It was a treasure that could lead to the birth of an Apex power. If the Holy Race players were to learn of their loss, they absolutely would go crazy. We might have gained a lot this time, but it is still too early to return. It's especially so now that we have obtained such a valuable design, Shifeng said, smiling as he put the design away. Have everyone take a break. We'll be changing our route. Instead of the City Lord's mansion, we'll be heading for the city's underground treasury. The city's treasury? Do you know where the Nameless City's treasury is, Guild Leader? When Gentle Snow and Hidden Soul heard Shifeng's words, their eyes instantly brightened, and they couldn't help but get the urge to shake an answer out of Shifeng. The Nameless City was undoubtedly a place of riches. This could be seen just by their harvest in the short time they spent here. Meanwhile, a city's treasury usually stored the wealth the city had accumulated throughout the years. One could say that most of a city's wealth could be found in its treasury. Normally, when players were looking to capture a city, their foremost priority would be the city's treasury, whereas the City Lord's mansion's priority came in second. However, as city treasuries were usually hidden in secretive locations and made difficult to find, players almost always had no choice but to capture the City Lord's mansion first. That way, they would immediately learn the location of the city's treasury. Not to mention, they could utilize the city's barrier to weaken their enemies in the city. Of course, it would be a different story if players learned of the location of the city's treasury ahead of time. Naturally. Shifeng smiled and nodded. So, rest up and get ready. Previously, he was utterly powerless against the Gorgon Queen, so he had no choice but to avoid her like the plague. But now that he had learned the advanced bronze mana purification technique and included Azure Shadow's group in his team, he felt they could fight the primordial godkin. Hence, he naturally wouldn't let this opportunity slip by him. Not to mention, the early liberation of the soul-eating ancestor would most certainly accelerate the Holy Race's development. If Zero Wing wanted a better chance at surviving and thriving in the upcoming Holy Mana War, it couldn't rely on just the mana purification technique. It would also need the Nameless City's treasury. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know. Report chapter so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 3548, Chapter 622, Fighting the Gorgon Queen Again. Chapter 3548, Chapter 622, Fighting the Gorgon Queen Again. Chapter 622, Fighting the Gorgon Queen Again. Are you sure we can take on a primordial godkin with our current strength, Instructor Black Flame? Azure Shadow anxiously asked Shifeng as he looked around the deserted underground passage they were currently traversing. Hearing Azure Shadow's question, the other Night Watch battle group members perked up their ears and looked toward Shifeng with anxious eyes. Their goal in coming to the Nameless City was to improve themselves. However, after learning the bronze mana purification technique, they never truly got to exert themselves to their fullest potential, be it when they fought against the city's Tier 5 legendary monsters or the Holy Race experts. Even when they fought against the city's legendary monsters, they could complete the entire clash without using any of their mana for skills and spells. As for the Holy Race's 1,000-man legion, it was merely a one-sided battle and couldn't be considered a proper fight. Currently, if they wished to truly achieve noteworthy improvements, they would need a sufficiently strong opponent. Only then could they push their standards to the next level. However, when they heard from Shifeng that they would be going up against a Gorgon Queen, which was a primordial godkin, they couldn't help but worry. Primordial godkins were monsters possessing the bloodline of primordial gods. Their strength surpassed the average dragon and angel of the same tier. Not to mention, out of the greater gods' domain's 22 taboos, one was a Gorgon Queen. While that Gorgon Queen in question might be a mutated existence, it remained a fact that ordinary Gorgon Queens were not existences that ordinary Tier 6 experts could fight against. Normally, if players wished to raid a level 180 Gorgon Queen, they would need to form a 100-man team of level 200, Tier 6 players at the very least. Currently, their team didn't even have 40 members. Not to mention, only 17 were Tier 6 players, and their average level was only 175. A huge gap existed in basic attributes between them and level 200, Tier 6 players. Relax. Follow my plan, and you won't have any trouble fighting the Gorgon Queen, Shifeng said, chuckling as he looked at Azure Shadow and the others. If it was before Azure Shadow and the others had learned the bronze mana purification technique, Shifeng would have never considered challenging the Gorgon Queen with them. But with the assistance of the bronze mana purification technique and their legendary weapons, they already met the minimum requirement to raid the Gorgon Queen. Now, it was only a question of whether they could survive one hit from the Gorgon Queen. If they could avoid getting killed instantly, raiding the Gorgon Queen shouldn't be a problem. While Shifeng was chatting with Azure Shadow and the others, the team arrived at the plaza situated in front of the city's treasury. At this time, although the plaza had already been repaired to a significant extent, it was still possible to see cracks and dropped weapons and equipment all over the place. This gave Azure Shadow and the others a feel of how tragic and terrifying the battle that had taken place here previously was. Despicable human! How dare you trespass on my territory again? I will have your soul annihilated for desecrating the holy land of my race. For a moment, an alluring voice echoed in the depths of everyone's minds, causing them to feel a hint of goodwill and fascination toward the voice's owner. Subsequently, a soul-stirring figure slowly slithered out of the treasury's gigantic steel doors, the figure's every movement seducing everyone and forcing their eyes to focus on her. Meanwhile, this soul-stirring figure was none other than the Gorgon Queen responsible for safekeeping the Nameless City's treasury. Gorgon Queen, primordial godkin, divine, level 180 HP? Everyone, consume these eternal god crystals. I'll have the war goddess distract her later. Remember to never try to block any of the Gorgon Queen's holy aura attacks. Shifeng commanded and promptly distributed some eternal god crystals to everyone on the team when he saw the Gorgon Queen emerging from the treasury. His previous clash with the Gorgon Queen allowed him to thoroughly understand that the Gorgon Queen before them was extremely proficient in mental attacks. If it wasn't for his concentration and willpower being sufficiently strong, he would have never survived the Gorgon Queen's mental attacks. While eternal god crystals were indeed precious, for the sake of ensuring their raid's success, he couldn't care less about wasting some of them. Immediately, everyone consumed the eternal god crystal they received, temporarily raising their concentration and mana perception by 1 rank. At the same time, various inspirations started to appear in their minds, one after another. In the meantime, Shifeng summoned a war goddess and used the Feather of Oath's heroic pledge on her, raising her tier by 1. And because Shifeng had raised his level to 170 since last time, the war goddess he summoned this time was at level 180. This effectively placed the War Goddess on the same starting line as the Gorgon Queen, as both were at level 180, Tier 6. Boom! As soon as the level 180, Tier 6 War Goddess appeared on the plaza, she promptly thrust her spear forward to block a large scimitar that had suddenly appeared before her. The scimitar was coated in holy aura, and its impact with the War Goddess's spear created an impact that cracked the surrounding space and caused Fire Dance and the other Tier 5 players, who stood some distance away, to stumble a little. So strong. Gentle Snow and Hidden Soul couldn't help but be shocked when they saw the Gorgon Queen suddenly appearing before the War Goddess. Although Shifeng had already informed them of the Gorgon Queen's strength on their way here, it wasn't until they got to experience the Gorgon Queen's strength at such a close distance did they finally understand how frightening the primordial godkin was. If not for the Tier 6 War Goddess's presence, they and the other Tier 5 players of the team would have definitely died just now. After all, they didn't even notice when the Gorgon Queen had disappeared from the treasury's entrance. By the time they noticed, the Gorgon Queen's blade had already been blocked by the War Goddess. She's going all out right from the beginning? Shifeng's expression grew solemn as he looked at the Gorgon Queen. The Gorgon Queen had started with a gold holy art right off the bat. If it wasn't for the War Goddess's intervention, even if he defended himself using Sword's Orbit, he would have been sent flying over 100 yards and sustained heavy injuries. However, before everyone could relax, the Gorgon Queen suddenly transformed her two scimitars into two full moons and charged at Shifeng, who stood 100 yards away from her. She completely ignored the War Goddess before her and everyone else in her way, behaving as if only Shifeng existed in this space. Don't even think about killing the instructor, Growling Potato, a shield warrior from the Night Watch battle group, bellowed as he activated the Tier 5 skill Wrath of Justice and the Tier 6 skill Shield Return. Then, he intercepted the Gorgon Queen with his shield raised. When the Gorgon Queen's full moons collided against Growling Potato's shield, Growling Potato stumbled a step back and lost nearly 1/3 of his HP, while the Gorgon Queen's advance came to a halt. At the same time, Azure Shadow activated Strike from Heaven, transforming into a streak of light that shot at the Gorgon Queen, his speed far surpassing the reaction speed of ordinary Tier 6 experts. Ants. However, the Gorgon Queen merely reacted to Azure Shadow's attack with contempt and, with a casual flick of her wrist, accurately deflected the ranger's strike from heaven with one of her scimitars. The degree of skill she displayed was so incredible that even 5th-floor experts would be left marveling. But during the brief moment the Gorgon Queen was occupied with Azure Shadow's attack, a silver spear suddenly swept at her willowy waist, catching her off guard. As a result, the attack connected fully and sent her flying several hundred yards away. The attack also caused one of her 9 HP bars to deplete slightly, finally exposing her previously indecipherable HP to everyone. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know. Report chapter so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 3549, Chapter 623, Princess's Reappearance. Chapter 3549, Chapter 623, Princess's Reappearance. Chapter 623, Princess's Reappearance. TL Notes. Chapter 284, Land of Ancient Dragons - Land of Primordial Dragons. Chapter 291, Ancient Dragons Power - Primordial Dragons Power. Chapter 293, System. You have received the Dragon Princess's favor and obtained the Primordial Dragon's power. So long as your Primordial Dragon's power is discovered by a certain evil god's followers or a certain demon god's followers, you will be marked by this evil god or demon god and be hunted down endlessly. System. You have received the Dragon Princess's favor and obtained the Primordial Dragon's power. So long as your Primordial Dragon's power is discovered by evil god and demon god followers, you will be marked by these evil gods and demon gods and be hunted down endlessly. When the Gorgon Queen's HP became readable, everyone present couldn't help but gasp. How are we supposed to defeat this thing? Will we really be fine, guild leader? Somber expressions appeared on everyone's faces when they saw the Gorgon Queen's HP. Gorgon Queen, Primordial Godkin, Divine, Level 180 HP 8,996,900,000,000. When everyone initially saw the War Goddess's spear doing over 3 billion damage to the Gorgon Queen, they were both surprised and delighted. After all, an attack of such caliber was more than enough to heavily injure a level 180 divine monster. And should the Gorgon Queen sustain a heavy injury, they would have a much easier time defeating her. However, their hopes were immediately dashed when they saw the Gorgon Queen's maximum HP of 9 trillion. Compared to the Gorgon Queen's HP, the damage the war goddess dealt wouldn't even be enough to tickle the primordial godkin. With her battle recovery, the Gorgon Queen could recover 2% of her HP every 5 seconds. In other words, she could recover 180 billion HP every 5 seconds, or 36 billion HP every second. Without at least 10 Tier 6 war goddesses, they would have zero chances of killing the Gorgon Queen. Sure enough, the system won't let us get to the treasury so easily. Shifeng was similarly astonished when he saw the Gorgon Queen's HP. Although this situation is outside of my expectations, we aren't without a chance. Everyone, move according to plan and buy me 30 seconds. Try your best to distract the Gorgon Queen and assist the war goddess. He had slain a divine-ranked Gorgon Queen in his previous life. However, compared to the Gorgon Queen he killed back then, the Gorgon Queen guarding the Nameless City's treasury had 10 times more HP normally. Without an overwhelming advantage in numbers or a taboo existence, it would be impossible for players to take down such a monster. Since their current circumstances didn't allow them to overwhelm the Gorgon Queen with numbers, their only option would be to rely on a taboo existence. Taboo existences were individuals who had surpassed Tier 6 gods and rivaled primordial gods. One hit from such an existence could heavily injure even a fully kitted Tier 6 god. Naturally, it would also be a piece of cake for such an existence to heavily injure a divine-ranked primordial godkin. However, it was incredibly difficult for players to acquire the strength of a taboo existence in God's domain. Normally, only Tier 6 players wielding divine artifact-ranked weapons could accomplish such a feat. Meanwhile, divine weapons were so rare that only about 1 out of every 10 cross-realm conglomerates would have one. In Shifeng's case, owning a divine weapon was nothing more than a dream for him, whether in his previous life or current life. Be that as it may, while he might not have a divine weapon right now, he did get to become acquainted with a taboo existence in this life. The other party in question was the ruler of the primordial dragon sanctuary and the closest existence to a primordial god. Dragon Princess Kalisha. Originally, Shifeng had hoped he could heavily injure the Gorgon Queen with the Tier 6 war goddess alone. However, after their brief clash, it was evident that only a taboo existence could heavily injure the primordial godkin. Hence, he had no choice but to splurge 300 god crystals and eternal god crystals to help Dragon Princess Kalisha recover to the standard of taboo existences. Immediately, Shifeng took out all of the ordinary god crystals he had acquired from Xia Qingying and some eternal god crystals from his bag. Then, he began converting their power and directing them into a summoning rune to complete the Dragon Princess's quest. So long as he completed Kalisha's quest and summoned her, she would be obligated to protect him from the Gorgon Queen. In the meantime, following Shifeng's command, everyone had no choice but to grit their teeth and attack the Gorgon Queen. They had to try their best to create an opportunity for the war goddess to land a direct hit on the primordial godkin. When the war goddess and Gorgon Queen resumed their clash, though, everyone quickly found themselves fascinated by the exchange. Whether it was the war goddess or Gorgon Queen, both possessed combat proficiencies far beyond what anyone present possessed. Previously, when the Gorgon Queen was focused on killing Shifeng and when the war goddess was able to exploit the Gorgon Queen's inattentiveness, it still wasn't possible to see the depths of their prowess. However, now that the two were focused on each other, they thoroughly displayed the intricacies of their combat experience. The handling of details when executing evasive maneuvers. The handling of impromptu changes and preparatory actions when attacking. The handling of impromptu mana adjustments and rapid conversions when using skills and spells. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that the war goddess and Gorgon Queen had handled all of these combat aspects perfectly. Meanwhile, when Azure Shadow and the others, who had consumed an eternal god crystal before the fight began, observed the fight between these two existences, they felt as if the doors to a whole new world had just been opened for them. After the battle continued for 20 seconds, everyone on the battlefield suddenly had their attention attracted toward Shifeng, who had been chanting an incantation and crafting a rune all this time. Extravagance. Complete and utter extravagance. In the time everyone was preoccupied with the fight against the Gorgon Queen, Shifeng had gone from expending ordinary god crystals to eternal god crystals that were as precious as legendary items. Multiple eternal god crystals could be shattering in Shifeng's hands every second. Even though Azure Shadow and the others weren't Zero Wings members, they still couldn't help but wince at this sight. After all, none of them actually owned their legendary weapons. Instead, these weapons were loaned to them by the Green God Corporation so that they could establish themselves in the Night Watch Legion. Yet, now, they were made to watch Shifeng expend enough eternal god crystals to equip each of them with a legendary weapon. When Shifeng started to expend eternal god crystals, the summoning rune before him also started to draw the surrounding energies toward itself. Even the mana of Azure Shadow and the others, which rivaled the mana of Tier 6 gods, was drawn toward the rune. Eventually, even the War Goddess and Gorgon Queen started to get affected, neither of them able to continue exhibiting 100% of their skills and spells potential. In the case of the Gorgon Queen, she even started to have difficulties concentrating holy power into holy aura, which, in turn, slowed her ability to execute holy arts and defend herself. As a result, Azure Shadow and the others started to land their skills and spells on the Gorgon Queen, each of their attacks reaping hundreds of millions of HP from the primordial godkin. Despicable ant. Die. When the Gorgon Queen saw that Shifeng's rune started to have an increasingly larger effect on the surrounding environment, she knew that Shifeng was attempting something extraordinary. Without hesitation, she ignored all attacks from the War Goddess and Azure Shadows group and used Chaos Spear against Shifeng. Chaos Spear was a Tier 6 super spell, and it carried the power of an ancient god when used by the Gorgon Queen. Even the Tier 6 War Goddess would sustain heavy injuries if struck by such an attack, and it would require multiple Tier 6 War Goddesses working together to block the attack completely. Hence, the logical move for Shifeng to make in this situation would be to evade the attack. However, as Shifeng was currently occupied with drawing Kalish's summoning rune, he had no choice but to take the Gorgon Queen's attack. Otherwise, not only would he fall short of success, but all of the god crystals and eternal god crystals he had expended thus far would also go to waste. Hurry up! Hurry up! When Shifeng saw that the Gorgon Queen had already finished forming her Chaos Spear, he began mentally urging the summoning rune to absorb the eternal god crystal's energy more quickly. Fortunately, at the same time as the Gorgon Queen released her Chaos Spear, Shifeng also finished injecting the last eternal god crystal into the summoning rune, completing it. Immediately afterward, the space in front of Shifeng shattered, creating a dark void that housed a figure several thousand meters tall. The figure in question was a beauty wearing a long, holy dress and a silver crown. The beauty slowly opened her eyes after appearing in the underground plaza, and the instant she did so, everyone present felt their souls shuddering. They couldn't help but feel as if all life was insignificant in front of this giant of a sleeping beauty. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know. Report chapter so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 3550, Chapter 624, Princess's Reward. Chapter 3550, Chapter 624, Princess's Reward. Chapter 624, Princess's Reward. When Dragon Princess Kalish's gigantic figure appeared in the underground plaza, everyone present couldn't help but be shocked. Even Azure Shadow and the others, who had a wealth of experience in the greater god's domain, were not an exception. What in the world did Instructor Black Flame summon? I'm confident I can fight even Tier 6 gods in my current state, yet I'm actually feeling fear right now? Heavens! I must be dreaming. That's a bona fide ancient god. According to the Great Library, only ancient gods can have a true body that exceeds 1,000 meters. An ancient god? The guild leader can summon an ancient god. Both Azure Shadows group and Zero Wings members couldn't help but doubt their eyes as they looked at Kalish's titanic frame. Gods could be regarded as the ceiling of strength for most players in the greater god's domain. They were existences feared by even the greater god's domain's various major powers. For this reason, any player capable of matching Tier 6 gods in strength would be qualified to speak to upper-ranking hegemonic powers as equals. The various upper-ranking hegemonic powers would not dare to disrespect these players, and they would also make extremely lucrative offers in the hopes of recruiting these players. But this was merely the upper limit that ordinary expert players could see. Above the myriad gods, there were existences known as ancient gods. These were incredibly ancient beings. Although they were similarly gods, the standard of their life rating had long surpassed the gods of the current era. Meanwhile, only Tier 6 experts wielding divine weapons could hope to put up a fight against these existences. Naturally, the strength of ancient gods was something all Tier 6 players and the various powers wished to grasp. Hence, they all frantically sought for clues pertaining to ancient gods, and so long as even the slightest clue was found, the many powers and Tier 6 players would try to secure it at any cost. Only, clues pertaining to ancient gods were extremely rare. Over 99% of Tier 6 players would go through their entire lives without ever encountering one. And anyone who managed to do so could boast about it for a lifetime. Yet, now, instead of a clue, a bona fide ancient god had appeared before their very eyes. Moreover, the ancient god was even summoned by Shifeng. How could they not be shocked by this situation? However, before anyone could snap out of their dazes, the Gorgon Queen had launched her Chaos Spear at Shifeng. Tier 6 Super Spell, Chaos Spear. Super spells were designed to allow their users to transcend tiers. When cast by the Gorgon Queen, Chaos Spear could rival the attack of an ancient god. Should it connect, it could instantly obliterate a holy city capable of housing 100 million inhabitants. Seeing the Gorgon Queen's attack, Shifeng instinctively unsheathed the Shadow Incinerator and readied himself to use Incinerator's phantasm at any time. In his previous life, Dragon Princess Kalisha was known by all as the ruler of the Primordial Dragon Sanctuary, one of the 12 sanctuaries. She was an existence transcending the average Tier 6 NPC, and she was even rumored to have strength rivaling primordial gods. But that was strength she had come to possess only after becoming the Primordial Dragon Sanctuary's ruler. Although Shifeng had already fulfilled his quest contract and helped Kalisha recover her strength, that didn't automatically make her the ruler of the Primordial Dragon Sanctuary. Meanwhile, with Kalisha's current strength, he wasn't sure if the Dragon Princess was actually strong enough to fully block an ancient god's attack. If he were to get hit by the Gorgon Queen's Chaos Spear as a Tier 5 player, he had a considerable chance of suffering a permanent death. Even if he had the Sacred Phantom Ring, it still wouldn't matter. After all item effects had an upper limit. Once an item effect's upper limit was breached, it would lose effectiveness. The power of ancient gods was regarded as the power of taboos in the greater god's domain. Meanwhile, the reason it was considered as such was its ability to shatter many of the greater god's domain's restrictions. It was so overwhelming that it could shatter the effects of even legendary items, let alone fragmented legendary items. However, just when the Gorgon Queen's Chaos Spear was about to bring death to Shifeng, Kalisha's titanic frame suddenly disappeared. Then, before anyone realized it, Kalisha had reappeared next to Shifeng in the size of a normal human, and held within her right hand was a spear shrouded by dark mist. "You really know how to get yourself into trouble, my dear heavens blessed," Kalisha said to Shifeng as she nonchalantly glanced at the fearful Gorgon Queen in the distance. Then, she glanced at the depleted crystals on the ground and continued, "But I have to say that your performance has exceeded my expectations. I have recovered a lot of my strength thanks to all these eternal god crystals you've gathered." After saying so, Kalisha gently squeezed the spear in her hand. Then, the Chaos Spear, which was capable of rivaling an ancient god's attack and obliterating an entire holy city, burst apart into a cloud of mist and faded out of existence. When the Gorgon Queen saw this scene, her body shuddered, and the fear in her eyes deepened. She also dared not make any further movements, evidently petrified by Kalisha's show of power. At this time, Shifeng was equally startled by Kalisha's performance. A primordial godkin's Tier 6 super spell was an attack even ancient gods would try to avoid confronting directly. At the very least, they would use a skill or spell to block the attack. Yet, Kalisha had not only caught the Gorgon Queen's Chaos Spear with a single hand, but she had even crushed it easily. The toughness and strength of her physical body was simply terrifying. "It seems you are also quite the lucky person to be able to find this place," Kalisha commented as she looked past the Gorgon Queen and at the treasury behind the primordial godkin. Then, she turned her gaze toward Shifeng and smiled, saying, "Anyway, as a reward for helping me recover, I can give you two options. For the first option, I can help you eliminate this little fellow and give you the full primordial dragon legacy. With it, your future achievements will not be in any way inferior to primordial gods. For the second option, I can help you 3 times with my phantom and give you a primordial dragon legacy crystal. With the legacy crystal, you only need to expend 100 god crystals to experience a complete legacy guidance, and you can do so up to 10 times before the crystal disappears. My strength is still unstable since I have just recovered. I will need to search the primordial dragon sanctuary for the primordial dragon relic right away, so you only have 3 seconds to decide." 3 seconds. Shifeng couldn't help but be exasperated as he looked at the yawning dragon princess. 3 seconds wasn't enough for him to properly consider his choices at all. Not to mention, both options were incredibly tempting to him. "All right, time's up," Kalisha tiredly said as she looked at Shifeng's pondering face. "I'm taking my leave if you still can't decide." Seeing that Kalisha truly intended to leave, Shifeng gritted his teeth and said, "I'll pick the second option. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know. Report chapter so we can fix it as soon as possible. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories,